Hitler's surprise winter offensive in 1944 broke through the Allied defenses in the Ardennes, forming what journalists would soon label the Bulge. German field commanders were convinced they had achieved the unthinkable, absolute strategic surprise against an enemy they viewed as complacent and overconfident. They were certain their winter gamble would split the Allied armies in half and force the Western powers into negotiations. After all, who could possibly stop 3 German armies, nearly 250,000 soldiers supported by 1,000 tanks, pushing relentlessly through frozen forests toward Antwerp? What the Germans failed to account for was one man. They did not know George Patton, and they certainly did not anticipate that during the harshest winter in decades, with temperatures plunging far below freezing, this American general would not merely halt their advance, but turn their bold offensive into a catastrophe that would doom Germany's final hopes on the Western Front. This is the story of how Patton's Third Army carved a path through snow and steel, turning white fields red with enemy losses and transforming Hitler's last great gamble into one of America's most decisive victories of the war. Lieutenant General George Smith Patton Jr. was 59 years old when destiny drew him toward the Ardennes. Born in 1885 into a family steeped in military tradition, Patton had spent his entire life preparing for the moment when the fate of armies might depend on a single commander's resolve and clarity of thought. By December 1944, he commanded the U.S. Third Army, more than 250,000 men backed by hundreds of tanks, and had already secured a reputation as the most relentlessly aggressive armored commander in the Allied coalition. Everything changed on December 16, 1944. As Patton's forces were advancing through the Saar region and preparing for their own drive into Germany's industrial heartland, Hitler unleashed Operation Wacht am Rhein. Under cover of darkness, 29 German divisions smashed into thinly held American positions in the Ardennes forest. The plan was breathtaking in ambition: drive 60 miles through Belgium and Luxembourg, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and sever the British and American armies from one another. What made the attack so devastating was not only its scale, but its timing. Allied intelligence had failed completely to detect the enormous German buildup. Through strict radio silence and night movements, the Wehrmacht had quietly concentrated 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks. When the assault began, it achieved complete tactical surprise. Within hours, German armored columns were racing westward, crushing American units and throwing Allied headquarters into confusion. The breaking point came 3 days later when General Dwight D. Eisenhower summoned senior commanders to an emergency conference at Verdun. The situation was grim. German forces had already pushed more than 20 miles into Belgium, threatening critical road junctions and placing the key town of Bastogne in grave danger. The U.S. First Army was disorganized, with entire units shattered or cut off. If the German momentum continued unchecked, Antwerp itself could fall, fulfilling Hitler's strategic objective. To understand what followed, one must understand the man who would shape the outcome of the battle. Patton had been preparing for this moment since his earliest days as an officer. He had studied the campaigns of Napoleon, Alexander, and Caesar, convinced that history reserved a decisive command for him in a moment of extreme peril. His experience in the First World War, where he led America's first tank units in combat, had taught him the decisive value of speed, armor, and relentless offense. Yet Patton's path to the Ardennes was far from smooth. His brilliant campaigns in North Africa and Sicily were overshadowed by the infamous slapping incidents in which he struck 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue. The scandal nearly ended his career and kept him out of the initial D-Day landings. Still, his energy, instinct for maneuver, and deep understanding of armored warfare made him indispensable. German commanders feared him more than any other Allied general. So much so that he became the centerpiece of an elaborate deception operation that convinced them he would land at Calais rather than Normandy. By the time the Third Army broke out into France in July 1944, Patton had learned to temper his aggression with discipline. His command style was unlike that of other Allied generals. Instead of directing operations from distant headquarters, he spent his days at the front, riding in an open jeep, often under fire, ensuring his soldiers saw him sharing their danger. The rapid advance across France demonstrated his operational brilliance, as his army surged nearly 600 miles in 4 months, liberating vast territory and capturing hundreds of thousands of German troops. But by autumn, fuel shortages and stiff resistance at places like Metz slowed his progress, leading critics to question whether Patton excelled only in pursuit rather than against a determined enemy. The Battle of the Bulge would decisively answer those doubts. What Patton demonstrated during the winter of 1944 defied conventional military thinking. When Eisenhower asked how long it would take for the Third Army to pivot north and strike the German flank, Patton's reply stunned everyone present. While other commanders were still struggling to comprehend the scope of the German breakthrough, Patton was already ahead of events. Unbeknownst to those at Verdun, his staff had detected unusual German activity weeks earlier and prepared 3 contingency plans for exactly this scenario. This was Patton at his peak. He did not merely react to events, he anticipated them. Where others saw disaster, he recognized opportunity. The scale of his proposal violated every standard rule of logistics. He intended to disengage 6 divisions, rotate them 90 degrees, and drive them more than 100 miles through some of the worst winter weather Europe had seen in decades, all while preserving their fighting strength. Moving an army already in contact with the enemy is among the most difficult maneuvers in warfare, and doing so in freezing conditions while maintaining secrecy seemed absurd. Yet Patton understood what no manual could teach. Bold, decisive action could transform desperation into victory. His philosophy was straightforward: attack relentlessly. He believed the enemy was always more fragile than it appeared, and that speed and aggression could overcome almost any disadvantage. This was not reckless bravery, but calculated audacity, grounded in preparation and a keen understanding of German limitations. Patton immediately identified the fatal weakness in Hitler's plan. The German offensive depended on flawless timing and rapid success. Fuel stocks were sufficient for only a few days, and continued movement relied on capturing Allied depots. Any delay would doom the operation. Rather than strike the Germans where they were strongest, Patton chose to attack the vulnerable base of the Bulge. His assault would relieve Bastogne and threaten to trap the German spearhead itself. Leaving the Verdun Conference, Patton issued a single command to his headquarters: play ball. With those 2 words, a pre-planned operation was set in motion. Within hours, more than 133,000 vehicles were moving north in one of the most complex troop movements of the war. Armored and infantry divisions advanced through snow and ice, supported by massive supply convoys hauling tens of thousands of tons of material. The winter was merciless. Temperatures hovered below zero, snow reduced visibility to nothing, and American soldiers lacked proper cold weather clothing. Weapons froze, engines had to be restarted constantly, and exhaustion was relentless. But Patton understood that winter warfare was as much a test of morale as of logistics. While others remained in heated command posts, he made himself visible, riding in the open despite the cold, his presence spreading through the ranks like a current of electricity. The effect was profound. Soldiers drew strength from knowing their commander endured the same suffering. His praise and confidence circulated rapidly. "We're the finest soldiers in the world. This is our finest hour." Patton believed it, and that belief became contagious. German commanders were stunned by the speed of the Third Army's maneuver. Even those who respected Patton's reputation for aggressive warfare did not believe such a movement possible under winter conditions. Their own experience on the Eastern Front had taught them how cold could paralyze armies, and they assumed American reliance on comfort and supply would make them even more vulnerable. This misjudgment revealed how deeply German leadership underestimated American forces by late 1944. The Wehrmacht of the Ardennes was no longer the force that had conquered Europe in 1940. Many units were under strength, poorly supplied, and filled with inexperienced troops. Fuel shortages, inadequate winter gear, and collapsing logistics eroded their combat effectiveness. The fighting around Bastogne demonstrated how far the US Army had evolved since 1942. The defense by the 101st Airborne became legendary, but it was Patton's relief attack that turned resistance into triumph. When German commanders demanded surrender, General Anthony McAuliffe's reply, "Nuts," became a symbol of American defiance. On December 22nd, amid a blinding snowstorm, Patton struck. His three-division attack smashed into the German flank, catching the enemy completely off guard. American armor and infantry advanced mile after mile, refusing to yield ground despite fierce counterattacks. Tigers and Panthers clashed with Shermans across frozen fields littered with wreckage and fire. Patton had even ordered a prayer for clear weather, and on December 23rd, the skies opened. Allied aircraft descended on German positions, accelerating the collapse. On December the 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastogne, shattering the encirclement. Patton pressed on. Over 6 weeks of brutal combat, the German offensive was crushed. By January the 16th, 1945, Allied forces met and erased the Bulge entirely. German losses exceeded 100,000 men, along with hundreds of tanks and aircraft. Hitler's final reserve was spent, and the gamble had failed. Patton's achievement was extraordinary. Repositioning 6 divisions in 72 hours while maintaining combat effectiveness remains one of the greatest logistical feats in military history. The Battle of the Bulge proved that George Patton was not merely an aggressive commander, but a strategic master who understood how audacity, leadership, and absolute confidence could transform catastrophe into victory. The snow of the Ardennes did indeed turn crimson, but it marked the moment when American arms, under Patton's command, delivered a decisive and irreversible blow to Nazi Germany.